to come and spirit of transparency. Not everyone is here, but they are on their way, and we are going to get started to be respectful of time. I want to call to order the Ad Hoc Boundaries Committee meeting, August the 10th, and take attendance. To my right, Vice President Jones.
Here.
Right left, Board Member Bolton.
Present.
And I am Dr. Moffitt. Present for people that are online, we've got staff present.
Yeah.
Okay. Let you introduce yourselves.
Daniel Hoying, the General Counsel.
Stephanie Scott, Assistant General Counsel.
Here we go, you Chief Information Officer.
And we have our CFT president.
Julie Sellers.
And we have our community members.
And we have community members. Would you all like to introduce yourselves? Come on.
Allison Goodman. I'm a student at PRM and at CPS.
Erin Fay. I have an 8th grader at Wilmington.
Ollie Davis. I graduated from the district some time ago.
And former board member. Okay, so we've got a very aggressive agenda, and I fully anticipate, again, of being transparent, that we're not going to get through all of this today, but it will be a very good start. I think I want to have this consultation with my colleagues and staff. I think that we need to lay a historical foundation so that we're all aligned on what our charge is, and we're all also aligned on where we're coming from so that we can look forward to where we're going. So I want to remind people that the formation of this ad hoc committee was done April the 25th in board minutes. And it was to evaluate the district boundary lines for elementary schools. That is our charge. And to read it, Member Morawski moved and Member Jones seconded a motion that the board create an ad hoc committee to work with the administration and the community, reevaluate the district's boundary lines for elementary schools. So that is what we are going to do. And the way that we did this last committee meeting, which I think worked, is we allowed conversation at each topic rather than at the end. So Rob will remind me if you have a question and you're online, raise your hand so that if we're on a topic, yes, hit the hand icon and then we can get your input. And you still only have 3 minutes or less. So for my people that like to give long soliloquies, they still only have 3 minutes or less per topic.
I want to put your microphone a little bit closer to
Okay. Can you all hear me better? Is that better? Okay. So first on our agenda, with respect to giving a historical perspective, we're going to hear from legal counsel regarding a historical review of the boundary lines and legal parameters. I know you gave this to us in policy, but can you formally give us a little bit of history for the public and for those online?
Yes, of course. And I'll say that my esteemed colleague, Ms. Scott, did a lot of research for this as well. And
so we know it's good.
Girl power, girl
as
power.
usual, I would be taking credit for it. The history is basically we looked back, shifting of district neighborhood boundaries that occurred during the Bronson v. Board of Education case. That's the racial desegregation case that was filed in 1973 and was handled mostly by Judge Rice, but there were a series of consent decrees, sort of settlement agreements that were adjusted through the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, and there was some shifting of boundaries that occurred then. Then the next period of time when the district really kind of looked at boundaries was during the FMP, the Facilities Master Plan, really to decide, what schools, there were schools that were rebuilt or renovated. There were some schools combined at that time. But I think the biggest point that we made in policy is that the district boundary lines really haven't been changed in a long time. This has been quite a period Really, since 2001, the district has not implemented any major redistricting except with two exceptions. One was the creation of the Hyde Park School. Boundaries were established for that. And second was when the district created the Clifton Area Neighborhood School. That was the most recent look at boundaries. With the Cannes School, it was important to the board to follow neighborhood boundaries. And the neighborhood boundaries that were followed for Cannes were Clifton, Cuff, and Spring Grove Village. The board also evaluated at that time the capacity and current enrollment of each school. In more recent history, the board looked at some redistricting plans surrounding the Pleasant Hills, Winton Hills Elementary boundaries, and then also on the east side, the Pleasant Ridge, Woodford neighborhoods. Woodford is a Montessori school.
No.
I'm sorry, it's not a Montessori, it's a
magnet.
magnet school.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. But largely attended by families in that neighborhood. That's really the history. And in terms of legal background, this was something we also reviewed in policy. Based on our research, really the board has the ultimate authority to determine the boundary lines within the school district. It is entirely within the purview of the board. The only real law that relates to this is if the district, lots of school districts in the state do not have inter-district open enrollment. In other words, you're assigned to a school based on the grade level you're in and where you live, your residence, and that's the only school you can attend. In a district that has multiple school options like CPS, if the district is going to allow for inter-district enrollment, not just to a single neighborhood school, but to other programs within the district, there's an administrative code section 3301-48-02, which establishes some rules that the district has to have. It doesn't say how you're going to divide up your schools, but it says that there must be a district-wide timeline of parental information for the application process and the notification of student acceptance. So essentially the district has to have a process and a timeline for how parents and families can apply and be accepted to those schools. The district has to publish the criteria for prioritizing applications for participation in inter-district open enrollment. The district has to have criteria for establishing district capacity limits by grade level, school building, and educational program. So those are some of the requirements if you are going to open up, as we have, our district to not just attending your neighborhood school, some of the things that have to be in place. Believe that summarizes kind of what we've discussed in policy, but Stephanie and I are both here to answer any questions.
Okay, I think that is really great information. Would it be possible for you to provide us a copy of that administrative code?
Of course.
So that
Yep.
the public can see it and we can see it as well? Because I was trying to write all that down, but you're pretty fast. You're speedy on the conversation, so I didn't get all of it. But I did get the gist of it, that the board has the authority to redesign the boundaries, and there are criteria because we are an open enrollment school. There are criteria that we would have to meet, which we do currently have a process in place.
We definitely have a process in place. We definitely have criteria. The board has actually did quite a bit of work a few years ago on what the priorities are going to be. So like siblings ahead of course of study, those are all a part of board policy. I would say, and I've had a lot of discussions with ODE, we had a sort of an investigation by ODE a few years ago related to our process. I think one of the most difficult for us is establishing district capacity limits. And I'll just say a little bit more on that. It's difficult because I understand why it's a rule. The reason it's a rule is to say you don't want to introduce too much discretion at a school level as to who can be admitted and who can't be admitted at a school. So you don't want, for example, a school to say to a Black family, there's no room at the inn, there's no more spaces available, but then a white family comes in and the school admits them. Or Jewish, Christian, whatever. I mean, you don't want to introduce the opportunity for discrimination. That's why capacity limits exist. The reason it's a challenge is because oftentimes, well, for example, for our neighborhood schools, we don't have capacity limits because we accept every kid who lives in the neighborhood at that school. And if that means we have to introduce a new teacher to this, we have to add a class, we're going to do it. That can sometimes be the case at magnet schools as well, as we want to welcome as many kids as we can into a school. And so, you'd say, the capacity limit is 300, but if we close in this extended learning area, create a new classroom, and add a teacher, we could make it 320. If we split this classroom and put a divider, and so we've done that at times in my view, in an effort to welcome as many kids into the schools that, where families want to send their kids. But I would say if the district has one area that it could improve on, it's to have those capacity limits and then live by them. ODE certainly would that would be their preference, I think. That comes up against this notion of trying to welcome as many families as well sometimes. So that's one area. The other two areas, I would say we have very strong processes. We have very strong prioritization that's been well established by the board for some time.
Yeah.
Can I react to that? I think that I appreciate that. And that's earlier in your comments makes sense that enrollment is really driving this, and that wherever our policies and processes are in enrollment, they're key to whatever it is that we all decide to do here. I do think it's ironic since the state of Ohio during our facilities master plan tried to cap our total, assuming that our district was going to be down in the not the low 30s, but in the I think the high 20s. So we had to engage in battle after battle. So and indeed, what also has happened is that we have now many of our elementaries, and I think this came up in finance perhaps last year, as I'm thinking about this being this year now, more than half of our elementaries are under-enrolled, which is important for us to understand as to our neighborhood elementaries. And indeed, these are things we kind of have to come to grips with because of transportation and because of staffing, and also the issues that some of our community members have raised regarding safety in our neighborhoods. So I think this is a great opportunity for us to look at this and see what we can do for the future. And I think people need to be assured that it's not happening this year, impacting families this year. People will be certainly, if there are changes, be grandfathered. And it's a bigger thing than just about boundaries. It's recognizing we may no longer just be a neighborhood and magnet system, because very frankly, if you just take out the Montessoris and you take out our international schools, as I try to call them, where there's a significant number of English second language, we're down to less than 6 magnets for all intents and purposes. And that's a very different place than where we were 15 years ago when magnets were created, frankly, to try to preserve the middle class staying. And it was the idea was that our magnets would look like our district population and our neighborhoods would look like it. So, and indeed, it's the reverse is what's happened. So I think, too, race is important to throw into that historical issue as well, because in the original boundaries of this, even preceding FMP, a lot of it was done, as were the magnets, in order to create an environment where there would be voluntary integration. And now we're kind of in a different place than that at this point. So I go back to the chair, but I wanted to add that to some of the historical stuff.
Okay, and we've got a comment from our community. Just say your name.
So one of the advantages.
She's not. She doesn't.
Oh, Carol, you gotta get near a mic and then say your name.
Okay.
And remember, everyone's mics are still on. They're always hot.
Carol Gibbs, Mount Auburn, Taft Elementary, and our little preschool. I was around when the magnet schools were started. Believe it or not, don't say a word. And one of the advantages to going back into neighborhood schools is parent involvement. You know, we had parents who lived in Mount Washington and children were going to Sailor Park. There was no way to get from there to there. So I'm hoping that this will promote that again.
All the parent involvement that we can get. Vice President Jones, did you want to say?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. Does anyone else have anything to add regarding the historical perspective? I think the history is okay.
That's okay.
Sure.
A couple of things that I would like to add to this on the historical perspective is what I have two of my neighbors who were actively involved and on the whole committee when Judge Rice was doing the whole integration through the lawsuit, and they were starting the magnet schools. But from that, those magnet schools, then we were able to, they did not have, when my kids started in a magnet school, you had to have a certain percentage of males, females, black, white, other, and so you could only go in if there was an opening for within that certain race or gender. And so my kids started in CPS like that. They went to Fairview under the Bronson, and it was a totally integrated school. It was wonderful. But then once they lifted that requirement, then that's when the shift happened because they had extra resources in those magnet schools. But we also, during the facility master plan, and I know that this is going back at least 4 superintendents, because I kept saying, when are we going to adjust the boundary lines for the schools? Because there were schools that were torn down. There were schools that were not in the same location. And there was nothing that was strategic about those boundary lines. And they kept saying, we'll do it at the end of the facility master plan. I was in those meetings when that was happening. And it was, it just kept, the can kept getting kicked down the road. And like you were saying, most of our elementary schools are under-enrolled, but that's because there aren't as many kids living in those neighborhoods currently because of gentrification. But we're going to have to address how are we going to make sure that even through the gentrification that those families want to make sure that they are coming into our schools, because that is what's going to improve our schools for everyone, is when to lift everyone up academically is when you have integration not just by race but by socioeconomics. And so the neighborhoods are becoming more diverse with the socioeconomics due to gentrification, and we can't just say, well, we don't want them because they'll find another school to go to. And so I think this is a great opportunity that we can start looking at those boundary lines. Where CPS board at that time was when they shut down Quebec Heights and they overloaded every single other school in Price Hill, and they did not change the boundary lines. Price Hill has been, they did not want those kids and families in their schools, and they basically pushed them out because of the conditions of those schools. And that goes back 14 or 13 years. But we also have, and I talked to Ozzie, Rockdale has one of the most beautiful partnerships with the zoo. They have a beautiful partnership with the gardens, and they have they're less than half of their capacity. And so why are we keeping it to that? There's hardly anybody left who lives in that neighborhood either, because there's not as many kids in Avondale as when I worked in Avondale, and there were kids on every block in every household. There's less housing. There's less families. And so how are we going to make that? There's a lot of people who would like to go for the opportunity for that program if it was really opened up. That's just my opinion.
Okay.
I would add to the FMP piece, Julie's right, that ideally it would have been great to look at this at the last year or two of Mrs. Ronan's superintendency, largely because there were some, we had completed the FMP, and it's a difficult thing to do, to look at boundary lines. if people aren't assured about grandfathering. That would have been great. But also, this is an opportune time right now because you have the results of the 2020 census. And it is by neighborhood, by neighborhood, by neighborhood. And, this is one of the first times in a few decades that the city of Cincinnati's population has somewhat grown. But also in this post-COVID year, when we have seen significant our own enrollment go down in a number of places except our high schools, this is an opportune time to really kind of right size, as we had to do with FMP, the enrollment piece, as well as some consolidation, as well as thinking about new programming, but more particularly figuring out we have 14 neighborhood schools that actually carry the name of the neighborhood with them. And we have 14 neighborhood schools that have no reference to the neighborhood that they're in. And so there are, I hate to use the word superficial, but there are easy things to begin to fix, as well as very difficult things to fix. And there are some neighborhoods that have 2 or 3 schools within their boundaries.
Sure.
So there's a lot of room for adjustment, and I think this is the great place to be starting.
I do know Board Member Vice President Jones had a comment, and then we'll move to, is there anyone online that has a comment, Rob? Okay, if you do have a comment, make sure you raise your hand, Vice President Jones.
Okay, thank you. First of all, let me say that I certainly recognize and acknowledge this process about reestablishing our boundaries as a very important concern, and it's certainly gathering up steam and momentum in the community. I know that for a fact. And I'm reading all this material, some of which I did not, I'm looking at all the stuff that I got to review kind of what we had done, and some of the material that I'm just seeing today I didn't have in my historical context. My only concern is not that this isn't an important or high priority. My concern is where in the list of priorities does it fall, and what are our expectations about moving forward in any specific timeline? So that's a concern. And the other thing that is of concern to me is the committee's charge to actually put the plan in motion, or is the committee's charge to recommend actions that the administration moves forward? Because I'm seeing it sort of blossom into what I call a working effort that I'm not sure, and I'm not convinced that lies here. So my question is more of a technical one. Everybody else's is more content and process and historical, and I appreciate that because I needed that. So I do have concerns about what the charge is, how we move forward, timing, and also budgetary implications. We talked about all this, but, we need to put that on the table in considering how we move forward, and especially if we establish it as a priority.
Thank you. I'm going to say this before we address that. I'm going to go back to what it says from April the 25th that clearly outlines that it says the ad hoc committee to work with the administration and the community to reevaluate the district's boundary lines for elementary schools. To me, reevaluate means that all of what you said, that we are to assess where we are and to make recommendations as necessary, and also to take actions if needed to present it to the board. Now, I know that the public does not have this plan in this report, but I'm also going to go back to the report. It's just entitled Meridian, which Board Member Jones just got, but Board Member Bolton actually does have. And we can definitely speak about this next meeting, but there are action items in here that the board authorized. That would be you, because this was last updated October 20th, 2021. that, have not been done. So as of yet. And so we need, there are some things that this committee can do, but I think that the first step is to get the historical perspective and to see where we are. And then I propose to look at each area. So we've got East, West, and Central. I think we should take it one at a time so that everybody doesn't have to come anticipating that we're talking about theirs and then we're only on the East. We devised a plan to actually look at schools in that particular region that we discuss. And then we just look at everything in that capacity. We look at the boundaries for the city. We look at the boundaries for the district. And then we take that and then we do that in parts. So that's to answer your question on the charge. I think the charge is very clear. I could be wrong, and please let me know, but it says here, which you seconded, a motion that the board create an ad hoc committee to work with the administration and the community to reevaluate the district's boundary lines for elementary school. So that's the charge. The timing, I would imagine we can set that pace. And budget, we can also bring in Jen too if we need to do that, to look at that. But I don't think we're there yet. I think that where we are is in the fact-finding stage, which is about gathering data. And also, let me say this too, and our superintendent just joined us. I think that it's prudent to give the superintendent a lot of this historical reference and information. And that's what I think the charge of this committee is to do as well, is to provide that historical point of reference, getting information from the community and the board. And we've got community members that have been here for a length, can give Linda. But I think that is all very useful in moving forward. So the timing piece, we can come up with a timeline, but I think the charge is pretty clear. Yes, Ms. Carroll.
We're sharing. I was on the community-wide task force too, which was interesting. And from the development side of the world, the city is screaming density. They are doing everything they can to pull people into the city. As fast as we can, we're doing that. And what we're finding, at least in Mount Auburn, is we are getting more young families with babies. What we really need to be about is selling our schools.
I agree. Yes, Superintendent Wright.
So I think the only thing that I would add to the conversation and all of the information from the conversations that we've had with our executive leadership team and the information that we've received and been able to review has really been beneficial. My only add to that would be in terms of thinking about timing is also giving us a bit of an opportunity to truly analyze the programming that we currently have in schools as well. Because as Board Member Bolton, and we've talked about it before, but as she shared and talks about, the systems that we have in terms of the magnet programs and the neighborhood schools and taking out Montessori, what do we really have left? I think that what I have seen in just a short time is we have a lot of schools that have programs that are in name only. And so when we start thinking about attracting families, just changing the boundaries alone is not the attraction for some of the families, as Julie talked about, even the gentrification that's happening. Whether it's agreed upon, whether it's comfortable for the community or not, it is happening, and it's happening across our city, and it's something that you can see. And so either we are going to create programming that's responsive to the families that are now in the communities, or we're going to continue to have alternate organizations that show up and create programming that is responsive to the community. So as the leader of the district, it's a part of our charge to also give back to the board and present to the board after we're able to analyze what are the gaps, what are those families actually, where is the interest for those areas, and how we're building those programs in our schools, and then marketing what's there. So I just wanted to add that piece. I think that a board member Moffitt, and I've actually heard it from each of the board members, but I do think it's a timely conversation to have. I would ask that as we continue to move forward, we looked at the dates to start with of having the meetings and when those meetings were held. So we knew what that timing was. But as we move forward, if we'll continue to do that as we're scheduling the sessions, for example, we're a week out from school starting, and there are 3 of the leadership team that are here focused on this area. So in terms of thinking about where we go next and how we're preparing, for the start of school, that's something that we want to be cognizant of as well. So thank you for the information, and thank you for the feedback. It's given a lot of information, but I would hope that as we're going through the process and having the discussions through the process, that we're also doing that with the lens of not just going back to what was, but making sure that where we go next is responsive to the needs of the new community, and or bringing in individuals to that particular programming because it is something that's special that people are interested in.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Board Member Bolton.
If I could react to 2 things. First, I'm trying to adhere, which is very hard for me, as many of you know, adhere to the very specific charge, which is about us reviewing with the community and the administration the elementary boundary lines. And certainly there are bigger things and later things that happen and would be impacted, whether it's about high schools or whatever. So I'm trying to just stay within that elementary piece. I think, too, that the timing of it, meaning some of this stuff might even impact next budget. It might even be something we can do in the near term so our PR folks can start to help us figure out messaging about this district and change the narrative for the district. I think the superintendent is completely right because that's too much of a pun. I can't say it. You have to change your name. I can't do this. But part of it is in Superintendent Mitchell's last couple of years, she said, just to that point, proof in the pudding or proper marketing, we really don't have Paideia in the true sense. So 3 schools that have it, even though I'm a absolute dyed-in-the-wool fan of Paideia, stop calling it that. Or in the Montessori, let's be truer to the Montessori model as best we can. And certainly the idea that some of our elementaries got to say that they were college prep. Well, to Superintendent Mitchell, we should all have college prep. So take that name off of those schools and make sure it's a district-wide. But I think the programming now has centered so much around our Vision 2020, which was to help us raise our enrollment and help us attract people to the neighborhood. But we have to see how true that is, too. For the part. So it is about enrollment. It is about geography. It's about demographics. It is also, as you say, about programming. And I think we have to be pretty comprehensive as we do it, looking at elementary schools only.
And that's a feat for you. You are trying to stay focused.
It is
Let me
very
tell you,
hard.
if you don't know, she's
Very
really
hard.
Before I get to you, Mr. Davis, I just want to say, I think that we can do all of this at the same time. I don't think that one thing is exclusive of the other. I think the community engagement, hearing the community voice about what was and where they'd like to go, ties into our setting goals as a board. It ties into, which is our governance training. It ties into our strategic development. I don't think that that these things in your team's investigation of the schools, I don't think that all of these things are exclusive. I think that they don't need to be siloed. We can work together to get all of these things done. So I think we can establish a timeline that fits with that. Mr. Davis, you wanted to speak. I'm going to put the clock on so that you are 3 minutes.
And he needs a mic.
And you need a mic. So scoot him down with the mic.
They have one. One problem that strikes me. I just want to make sure I'm reading this right. So only 7 of our 42 elementary schools are not 100% economically disadvantaged.
What are you looking at? I'm sorry, I don't even know.
Economically disadvantaged column, which you could find on every individual page.
These are long charts.
Okay.
Is that the long charts?
Okay. So just for the public, I'm sorry, the people that are not sitting here, you're talking about this school profiles packet. And is that online for everybody, Jeremy?
Yes.
Okay.
It's being added if it's not already.
Okay. So I just wanted to reference everybody back to where you're at. What page are you on,
I appreciate it.
Mr. Davis? Oh, okay.
Oh, Lord.
He's on
He's gonna go
the
through
first
every
page. He
single
hasn't even
page.
gotten very far in it. Okay, so give me. Yes. Okay. So
color part.
for the public, we're on the first page, and it's a colored sheet. It looks like this. The yellow column is where he is. Can they see me, Jeremy? Can they see?
No,
That's right.
Not Jeremy, Rob. I'm sorry. Can they see? We are on this page.
It's just
First page,
First
yellow
the title
column.
page, yeah.
Okay, Mr. Davis.
2 points. One, I was wanting to make sure I was reading that right for Jeremy, for Chief Information Officer. If there are only 7 schools that are not 100% economically disadvantaged: Cairns, Hyde Park, Kilgore, Sands, Campbell Beach, and Fairview. My question to the committee is, are we utilizing economic data as we shape the boundaries for our elementary schools? I hear a lot about marketing and this and that, yeah. But if all the neighborhoods are drawn in the least possible area median incomes, then we're going to continue to get this column where all our schools are poor except 7.
So,
I'd have the superintendent respond.
who wants to respond? Superintendent, right, or Jeremy?
Part of it. So a part of that is district, as did many districts across the country, when there became the opportunity to do full school choice around the lunch programs and how the students were served within the lunch programs, they designated schools as through the district-wide process, designated schools as Title I schools. So what you're referencing, and that came from that's where we get the economically disadvantaged number from. That's where that process came from. So if you think about where we are right now, for example, those 9 schools that you referenced, most of them are Montessori schools, but those 9 schools that you referenced, those schools would be schools like right now that we're going back, now that the moratorium has lifted around students paying for lunch. Those are the schools where parents have to then do an individual application for them to qualify for free or reduced lunch. Where in other schools, the district could apply for those, and all of the students in those schools actually get free lunch.
This is one of my challenges, because 3 of these schools are actually neighborhood schools.
Yeah.
And I remember this coming up when we were doing Cairns.
Mm-hmm.
Cairns is a neighborhood school, Hyde Park's a neighborhood school, Kilgore's a neighborhood school. And I'm just encouraging the committee to look at the economic boundary as you start to suggest different schools and the different school boundaries. There should be something that we can do to help.
Madam Chair.
Got it. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
When we had everyone knows I'm not a fan of the Ohio report card, but it's, been suspended. Now it's going to be released. It's been suspended for a couple of years. On that, where you saw economic disadvantage reported, and you follow it year after year after year, the economics of the student population directly impact on the achievement within that school. And that doesn't mean you have to have 100% kids that are somehow rich than anybody else in this room. That's not it. You could follow where you have at least a third of the student population that is not economically disadvantaged. You could actually compare that school with other schools that didn't have it or had more or whatever. You would see that the grades reflected, the overall school grades. I think Ozzy's right. You want to be thinking about economic diversity as well as cultural diversity, language diversity, nationality. That has to be part of it. And indeed, it did reflect. And there's different reasons for that. But it was a matter of history, in fact, that economic diversity is very essential for rich kids, middle income kids, and kids that don't have any money at all. So that diversity, I think, and we looked at that when we did, and you remember this, Mr. Davis, when we looked at Cairns, we made sure particular neighborhoods were also involved. And I think that might be part of a strategy where you're kind of, since we have the census data now, for every one of our city neighborhoods and also our adjoining neighborhoods, we can make some serious decisions there that I think may impact it more so than even racial diversity does.
So
good point.
We're going to get President Sellers, and then if anyone is online, we'll get them, and then we'll move on.
And And the other thing I think that's impacting the level of poverty is those families who live in those areas that are becoming more gentrified. They're sending their kids to private schools, parochial schools, charter schools, because they can get those vouchers. And I know families who have plenty of money and they get vouchers and send their kids to expensive private schools. And so one of the things is because they said, well, they said they didn't feel welcomed coming into our schools where they were new to the neighborhood of the gentrified. But I think all of this is intentional. And I think they have really lobbied and pushed the state, because we have just seen this backpack bill, the House Bill, is it 616, of the expansion of vouchers with no limitations. That's what's causing our kids to be left behind, and we're going to have financial problems because students who are high with IEPs, high percentages of IEPs, you look at these schools, they have higher percentages of IEPs. In some of the schools, high poverty, they're much more expensive to operate than a school that is all homogeneous. Middle class homogeneous are less expensive to operate. And that's what those voucher and charter schools are really targeting, is those kids.
Thank you. Anyone online have a question? Okay. All right. Does anyone in the room have anything else to add to the historical context before we move on? I think we did it. It only took 45 minutes, but it's okay. So let's move on to quadrant school, second on our agenda, pre-K to 6 and pre-K to 8, and then high schools. Jeremy, you're going to share a little bit of information there as well. Yes.
You're speaking.
Oh, okay. So in all transparency, this was something that I was not familiar with and had to get a history lesson quite extensively from our treasurer, Wagner, yesterday. That we were still a little bit struggling on trying to come up with an exact timeline. She was guessing the early 2000s when we were last implemented a quadrant structure for our magnet schools. To my understanding, there were 4 quadrants essentially dividing the city: northeast, northwest, southeast, southwest. And those were designated kind of as a 1, 2, 3, 4. And from that piece, depending on which quadrant your address fell in, would dictate which of the magnet schools you had the options to enroll in, right? And in many cases, what it turned into was a east and west discussion. So it was like quadrant 1 and quadrant 2 on the west side would actually just be together. You could apply on the west side, which ultimately looks like it led to what we essentially have today, where our magnet schools are designated region east or west, roughly along the division of I-75 is where it falls currently. And those schools the addresses are assigned based on the neighborhood school where you currently reside, and then that is compared to the east-west magnet designations to determine where you can apply for in the lottery for our current magnets.
East-west or district-wide.
East-west or district-wide.
Yes.
You know, the quadrant thing predates me, and I started in 2008. But one of the things I think we discovered in the last many years about the quadrant, because it was like there were separate little school districts. Mm-hmm. You had people in charge of quadrant 1 and quadrant 2, and I mean an entire administrative system, plus the resources of supplying the qualified teachers and the programming and the 4 times. What we found resourcing-wise is that we probably can't afford quadrant. As much as that would be great for our transportation budget, you can't create 4 different school districts. Mm-hmm. We don't have the resources. And so that was one of the other reasons we started to think in terms of really how culturally and geographically the city is actually organized, which is you have East Siders thinking East Siders thinking that they're East Siders, and West Siders thinking they're West Siders, but those of us in the central corridor, we don't think of ourselves as either of those. And that's a great migration route through the city is that central corridor. And I think indeed it was President Sellers that first brought that to everybody's attention by focusing on the underservicing that was in the Central Corridor. Me as a native of the Clifton area, me as a native of both Sailor Park and College Hill. The quadrant is just hard to resource and have any kind of equity. Whereas if you really think east-west and you think district-wide or you think the Central Corridor, as we move along, I think that it's something we could actually perhaps afford versus finding four pots of money or gold. So,
and I will say, as a parent who lived through that quadrant piece,
yeah,
it felt very exclusive. It felt like if you didn't live in this particular area, you couldn't go to a school that you wanted to go to. And that doesn't have anything to do with kids and their learning. It has everything to do with where parents choose to live.
And I worked in it, and the overhead cost.
So I'm glad we moved out of that, because that didn't.
I guess that's off the list.
So we're not going back to that at all. Not at all. So
We'll
does
see
anyone?
what the superintendent says, but I think
We'll
made a
override
case.
that one. So does anyone online have any questions, Jeremy? Everyone good? Board Member Jones?
Just a fleeting thought again. I'm writing down sort of all the things that I'm hearing are areas of that we're going to work through, and I don't want to leave off the list. And I think everybody knows this, and I don't want to be too cynical about this, but all of this has huge financial implications, and that in and of itself. As we talk about all these things, enrollment, geography, demographics, programming, economics, and resources, and marketing, it's going to cost us something. And I think as part of the overall plan as we move forward is thinking, again, about where the priority is in relation to everything else that's going on in the district. I think we have to do this. I'm not saying that, but I also want to make sure that that's at the top of as we move forward, that we're also thinking about costs along the way, not in the end, not design it and then fund it, but as we move forward through it.
I can appreciate the devil's advocate, Jiminy Cricket perspective. Okay. I appreciate that. But I will also say, in response to that, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We have the ability to do multiple things at the same time. I don't want it to feel as if this is not a priority. It's a priority to me. I know it's a priority to community members. The discussion happens in silos in different spaces. And so I think that to have the discussion with the community collectively, in addition to the administration, that's what the charge is very clearly stated, that we are to reevaluate those things, keeping in perspective the budget and all of those things. I think as long as we're cognizant of it, I think that we can develop a timeline that is not only responsive to our charge as board members to the community, but it is also fiscally responsible and gives power to the administration to do her work, but then also be connected to the values and what the community wants. So,
and I just want to say, every committee has a devil's advocate. I don't want to be called the advocate for the devil in any way. Okay. But I do think that oftentimes when we get into these bigger initiatives in of things, we think about the meaty things that are attractive to talk about.
Sure.
And I think, we're dealing with a couple of things. We're in transition just in terms of the leadership. We're in transition. We're starting school. We have to start a budget planning, in January or something. So as you call it, devil's advocate, I'm just thinking a little bigger. And like I said, this is morphing into a huge community effort. And there's nothing wrong with that. We just cannot forget to balance that out with reasonable financial planning. And so again, it goes back for me to what pieces, yes, we can, what did you say? Chew gum. What's that?
We can walk and chew gum
at the same time.
I absolutely believe we can.
But not in isolation of everything else that's going on in the district.
Oh,
I just want to be clear about that.
Well, I'm going to say this last thing, and then I will try my hardest to be done with it. This plan that I'm looking at that was revised in October of 2021 was with you on the board and board member
Stop
Bolton.
saying that. It was with the board.
It was
Thank
with,
you.
No, well, I'm talking about the people that were in the room. I was not. So there are action items listed here that have not been completed. And what I am finding is that has happened more often than not, where we talk about things in the moment and then something comes up and we pause and we say, okay, well, let's pivot a little bit, and then they get forgotten. And so I think that this is super important. I think this is important primarily because it's important to the community. They've shown up today, and the discussion can happen in community with all of those things that I think you've referenced as being important and significant. I think we can develop a timeline that is responsive to being fiscally responsible for the next budget. But in order for us to do that, we really have to identify where we are and where we'd like to go. So that's the last thing I'm going to say about it. And then,
as finance chair, I think one of the reasons we're doing this is money. To look at the benefits and the cost, because we've said again and again, what we are currently doing is not sustainable financially, whether it's transportation or perhaps staffing or what have you, or programming. So I'm totally there with the vice president that as we go, let's keep that in mind for the cost and the benefit.
Absolutely.
Not like we're not going to design anything. Let's be real. But as we go through it, it's not going to, at the end point, oh yeah, treasurer, now you add up how much money, which is sort of what happened in our most recent strategic plan. We kept doing stuff, and then, oh, by the way, how much will this cost? We can't get there again, for sure. But I think the point is well taken to really think about the future. We have to look at the financial sustainability of all of this.
I completely agree. Yes, ma'am. Ms. Carroll.
I'm just going to ask a question. I think she answered. I thought part of the
She doesn't have a mic.
A lot of money.
Your mic. You have to put a mic on over there
Mike.
next to you.
I thought one of the points of doing this activity was to save the money on transportation. I mean, I thought
Originally, yes.
I think that's definitely there were a bunch of different conversations going on, and that was one reason for the formation of it as well. Was hey, we can. Let's look at the transportation. Okay, so
Let's get to our charts that he produced.
now is the fun part. No one online has any questions, Rob? Okay, good. We're good. We're doing something right. Maybe we're answering all their questions. And we are about at, it's 11 o'clock, so just to let you know the time. Now we're going to review Cincinnati recognized neighborhood boundary line. That would be you.
Yeah, so
You want
I'm
that?
trying to jump us ahead a little bit
You want
there.
it?
But if you want to look at the packets, and so really, feel free to stop me at any point if we want to have discussion. From agenda item 3, 4, 5, and 6 will all kind of flow throughout this data
Okay.
and this package that we're looking at. So it's, just at any point if you want to stop talking about a specific item. But if you want to take a look at the package that's provided, there are extras available for the community in the room. It's available online, so I would ask community members leave them today, so we don't have to kill a whole bunch of trees for next meeting. I will bring these back. I'll make sure they're available at every meeting going forward. There's spares for the community to look
They're
forward
great.
to have. But so if we look through the packet, the first thing you'll see is the data sheet. This is the Excel spreadsheet with the page. That's color coded.
Okay.
This basically is a combination and a comparison view of all of the data of the sheets behind it with a little extra. But we'll come back to that as we go through the further agenda items. If you want to look past that, you'll see that each school in the packet, pardon me, I'm still processing some post-COVID bronchitis. So I'm here.
Wickedy grace.
You'll see that it has the name of the school. In parentheses, it'll have the designation of the school currently as what's being publicly provided, whether it's a neighborhood, a magnet, a Montessori, as well as whether it's an east side, west side, or a district-wide designation. And you will see the map below, which will show the dotted white lines are the neighborhood boundary lines established by the recognized and established by the authority of the councils for those neighborhoods by the city. Always have to struggle to get that out. The blue outline is the attendance boundary that CPS has established.
Love it.
I'm going to pause you 1 second, Jeremy. Is it possible to just pull up one of these so that people that are online listening and or looking can at least see one. The first one that we're looking at is Bond Hill Academy. If you do happen to have the ability to go to, I think it's on Board Docs. It's a huge file on Board Docs. You can see it, but if you can't, we're going to pull one up just so that you can see what we're looking at. Jeremy's pulling it up. This is just such great data.
It's
I think
fantastic.
I want everybody to see it. Where's the news media at? Good stuff happening over here at CPS.
There you go.
Okay, so this is an example of what we're actually seeing. Okay, so now you can look online. Thank you, Jeremy. Go ahead.
And so following, in addition to the map on the right side, you'll see enrollment trend data. The top chart is looking at 6 data points around the first quarter enrollment and the fourth quarter enrollment. So the start of the school year and the end of the school year across 3 years. So we can see, traditionally, we've looked at our projections from a year-by-year standard. We cross those over 3, but we look at limited data points. This is expanding that out, so we're looking across both the start of the year and the end of the year. So where we started and where we ended. So that gives us a 3-year trend for the enrollment. Second chart is a 1-year trend. So it shows all 4 quarters of the school and what the enrollment did within the school year for on these charts will be for the last school year, the one we just completed. Below that, you'll see the average enrollment that is across the 3-year period. And then the capacity of the school is defined. It's the FMP build to capacity plus any renovations that have been done since then. So it is not, a walk the building maximum capacity occupancy. It is the intended capacity of the building as it was built to. And then below that, you'll see the demographic data, which includes all of the the racial and ethnicities, the ESL disabilities, economically disadvantaged data, the homeless, as well as our foster children's KISSER systems. And then finally, the data that we talked about that was requested last time that we've added is the percentage of students that live within walking distance of the school and do not get transportation provided by CPS. The second one is the percentage of the enrollment population that is from within the attendance boundary. And then the last out of boundary data is the percentage of their enrollment that is attending the school from outside of their attendance boundary. And that's available in the sheets.
I love this.
The school profile sheets are in the same order as the data sheet. So you have your neighborhood schools up front, then it's followed by the east-west magnets, followed by the district-wide magnets. We did also include, I know it's outside of our scope of our discussion, but because this will be used outside of just this committee, right. I think this is a great tool for the district. The high schools are in the back as well as the pre-Ks.
If I could also add, and to the discussion when we were asking Jeremy to put this information together, we're also adding, in addition to that, the programming that's currently available in the schools as well. So that way we get a full comprehensive picture. To Jeremy's point, this will be used for other opportunities for us also. So we wanted all of the data in one place. So as we looked at it, it was giving something that we could really work with.
Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
If I could, first of all, it's so much better to see it this way than over the last 6 years. See, this is this, and then here's this big map, and then there's that. And so you have to try to put it together. Having it in one place is so much better and fantastic. The other thing, if you're talking about that, it'd be great to know which of these schools are community learning centers, which ones of the schools have school-based health centers, because in our planning too, as we go down the road, that whether or not there is proper medical access for many of our families, it would also be impacting it. So I've always wanted just a big board that says, okay, this is what's offered at this school, and we've never frankly seen that when you really put it together. So this will be great.
We don't have it. So
Boom.
when we asked for it, it's a work in progress.
That's great.
So we wanted to get to this first.
Oh, yeah.
As we looked at where we wanted to go next, we did want it all in one place.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, ma'am.
And I'm seeing, I heard the reference to high schools being in the back, but I don't see, and that's fine. I don't see them. Should they be on this sheet as well?
No, they're not on the data sheet. Again, the data sheet is more for our discussion here about the elementary schools. But the profile sheets do include the high schools as just a complete packet.
Thank you.
Gotcha.
Okay. So to the next.
Wait, hold on 1 second. Mr. Davis, question?
I'm wondering, what are some of the reasons so many students going be out of boundary for these elementary schools?
Special services.
So if
I just don't know.
hold on just a second.
Okay.
If we go to the next part, basically starting on topic number 4, I think that kind of lends to the big question of how big of a problem is this, and a lot of the data points that we talked about. Let me pull up a different slide, please. So as we look at the data sheet, it's color-coded for a couple of specific reasons. And the first one being, when we look at that inbound and out-of-bound percentages, if you look in the gray area, that is around that set of data. You'll notice that there's a couple of, the columns are highlighted in red for certain schools. Mm-hmm. So what we looked at in our initial analysis was, what is the average against these schools? So it's the average of these schools included in the analysis of percentage that is out of bounds. And that came down to 22.8%, right? So then we started looking at flagging those schools or those schools or programs that were significantly above that range for out of bounds, or out of boundary percentage. So approximately more than 5% above that is what we looked at first. And this is the list of schools that come from that. There were 8 schools that were what we would consider significantly above the average for having in their out of boundary enrollment percentage. Chase, Evanston, Douglas, Rockdale, Winton Hills, Roselawn, Silverton, and Taft. And each of those requires a little bit of deeper looking in to see potentially some of the reasons as to why. Mm-hmm. We're still developing pictures as to the entire reason, but when you look at these, actually starting at the bottom is a little easier. So Silverton and Taft are the extreme outliers. If you look there, the out-of-bound percentage for Silverton is 70%, Taft Elementary is 66%. But those are what we would consider hybrid schools. They're both a magnet school with district-wide enrollment, but they also service a neighborhood boundary attendance for certain grades and programs. So since there's a combination for that school, it's harder. Those are kind of easy to see why there would be such a high amount of out-of-boundary. When you look at Roselawn and Chase, you can see here we have the number of students who are attending those schools in a specialized unit, who are the students of an employee or are attending specifically for pre-K. When you start looking at those numbers, you can see out of bound percentage roughly is 152 for Roselawn. You can see 72 of those approximate number are there for specialized units. They're there for specific services being offered at that school. So that brings the number down to really 4 schools that have, above an average number of out-of-boundary enrollment that not there necessarily for these specific services, and we need to look deeper into seeing which services or what other reasons they have to be higher. Does that help answer your question?
Oh, absolutely.
Great.
I have a question for you, Jeremy. Do we know where those families that are coming for the specialized units, do we know where they're coming from, like what neighborhoods they're coming from?
We do, and if we have an interest and want to see it, I can pull up the actual program map and dot out exactly where those are for any individual school we want to look at.
If I can also, when you finish, I can share one.
Sure. What I'm interested in, not in that data in a silo, but is there a neighborhood that they're coming from primarily that we don't have something in? So for instance, if we have a lot of people going to Roselawn for a specialized service, but they live in Avondale, is it that we need to put programming in Avondale? That was my question.
So when we talk about, using Roselawn Condon as a specific example, that is a program where we have a lot of our special needs programs. Mm-hmm. So that program services, if you go into the back of the building, most of the back of the building is specialized services. So we bring the students to that so they get maximum support in that particular location. So if there's not the program that's in their particular neighborhood or their neighborhood school, we are staffing them to that program. So we have our hospital, our students that are multiple disabilities, that are medically fragile. So that's really the main thing in that space that brings them into that program.
But I'm just wondering, are they coming from a specific, like a neighborhood where it might be that we need to put some programming in that neighborhood?
They
That's all.
would, we
I
could
know
get, we could add the information, but for that particular environment, they
It's
would be
not.
coming from across the district. That's where we as a district have invested what needs to be done to provide the level of service that that population of students
For
needs.
decades.
Sure. I was just wondering, like, if we've got of that 72 and we've got a huge number coming from the west side over, would it be prudent to put programming on the west side so that those students we wouldn't have to pay for transportation of those students? That's what I was wondering. Is there a large number coming from a different neighborhood to one of those schools for the specialized programs, and then we maybe need to look at investing in their neighborhood, because then we would be saving on transportation costs. We might save if we put programming in closer to them. That's what I was wondering.
And, and one of the other things, a lot of these schools have very low enrollment numbers, and so the percentages goes up because those specialized programs like the medically fragiles and all of that, that is really their focus for their school, and those buildings were built specifically for those needs.
Okay.
They have to have certain things.
Okay.
They have wheelchairs and
Okay. Any questions online? Good. Any questions in the Ozzy? I think you said you had another one. Did you have another one?
No, Jeremy.
Yes, you keep doing that. You keep stepping in front of poor Jeremy.
Yeah, go right there.
So the next data point we talked about that was requested was the capacity of the buildings. And again, we looked at it in terms of an analysis against the boundary data that we were looking at. If you go to the second page of the data sheet, you'll notice the schools are highlighted in a golden color. That's this list of schools for ease. That come down to second page of the data sheet. Second page. There should be a second page.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait. Yeah, that's it.
The one's highlighted in gold.
He pulls out the yellow.
I got it. Thank you.
And so what we looked at there was comparing the average enrollment across those 3-year data points versus that capacity to see what schools were consistently above the capacity in the enrollment. This is the 8 schools that we came up with. Obviously, again, there's some differences between the schools. You can see that Sands, Dater, pardon me, are both Montessori schools. And they're not necessarily a neighborhood boundaries. They have a district-wide recruitment or an east-west regional. So looking at these 8 schools, basically you can see the numbers are not extensively above on most of them, but it is a very limited number that is consistently above the capacity for the school. And a special note is that none of these schools are on the other list of having an exceptionally or a significantly higher out of boundary enrollment percentage. So most of the schools facing capacity problems are facing that capacity problem from within their neighborhood attendance boundary, not from students coming from outside of their neighborhood or outside of their attendance boundary. But no, Hartwell is not a magnet.
they have 7.
Yes. They also have a growing population of Hispanic.
Well, and there's an example too. We have basically that school in that school community in 2 different schools. So again, low-hanging fruit, it's really Hartwell Carthage School. It's not 2 separate schools. It's a program that's been divided physically because of whatever reasons. And I do think, to the point, I think you do have to do a couple of things here. The administration, forgive me, but one is really cleaning this up as to things are magnets or not, because that college prep thing, 4 through 6, which is that we have things listed here as magnet schools in particular grades because of the college preparatory. And it was long decided, again, during the Mitchell era, that everything should have that, at least that capacity. Every one of our neighborhood schools should have that capacity. So that's there. And then Woodford's listed, we decided a couple of years ago that Woodford was a very much under-enrolled magnet. And very frankly, one of the great, I won't say, I'll say travesties, is when the Pleasant Ridge was created, Kennedy Heights lost their neighborhood school. And so it became Woodford, and there are things that are easily done, or at least easily in
Easier.
small letters or something. But I really think we have to take a grip and get a grip on this, whether something's a magnet or not a magnet.
And I think the other thing that I would add to that, we pulled this data from the most recent information
Absolutely.
that we had that's online for the designations for the schools. So when you look at that, that's what's on the designation
Yes.
right now. So that's something that, we need to come back to. And I think also, to your point, and I keep talking about an audit of our programming, but as we're doing that, I think that leads to when we come back with what we find from that audit, it gives us more information to talk about. This is what's out. This is what we see. This is what's actually happening in practice, and this is what we recommend moving forward. So I really think that it's aligned with the conversations that we're having.
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Some of
Microphone.
Some of the 4 to 6 buildings, the elementary neighborhoods that had that designation 4 to 6 for magnet, is because it was before Spencer, and based on the Terra Nova scores, which they took in the 3rd grade, if they had a high percentage of kids who were identified gifted, then they had a gifted coordinator at those schools. And then some of the neighborhood schools surrounding them, those kids who were, if they passed that gifted, they were getting those services because we have to provide services for those students. And so you have to think about why was it created and what was the law, and it's still identified on our report card. And so we do have to provide those services to those students who identify as gifted starting in the 4th grade, because that Terra Nova test is in the 3rd grade. And everybody's not going to Spencer. As much as we have said that's our gifted school, that is not our only gifted, those are not our only gifted children in the district.
And I'll just add to that. It's just such alignment with just so many conversations that we've had. But when we talk about that, a part of that as we move forward is we're in a place right now, and I know we don't love talking about the report card, but it's what we have right now. And so when we think about where we are with gifted programming, for us right now, we are in a designation for students where we've designated them, but not all of them are receiving the services that they should receive. So as a result of that, there are certain schools that even if they have the population of students, they can never get the maximum points on the report card in that particular component because we don't have those services available. So that's one of the areas that we're actually looking at, because we don't want our schools, that's a low-hanging fruit kind of area that we really, over the course of the next year want to focus on, because we do have a lot of students about 10% of our students right now in the district are designated as gifted. And I don't know if that's something that has actually been talked about collectively. We have to go back to how we're providing services for them. It's about 3106, I think is the number right now.
See, this goes back to my point that we can have all these conversations at the same time, and then everything aligns together, I really believe. And if we collectively work on a timeline, then I think the conversations don't have to be siloed. They could be all together. Does anyone else have any other questions?
I do think it's worth noting as the out of boundaries that Jeremy has raised, we ought to look at those things that are designated as magnets and see if they really are. Because by who's not just the programming and what's being delivered, but nobody's showing up. And that's what we found a couple of years ago regarding Woodford, and it was a wonderful school, wonderful neighborhood. In Silverton, we have the Cheviot gifted program within the Cheviot school, very important to that community, but it really is more like Spencer West or Spencer East if you really start, and you keep the name, but there are things that we can do that will make things a lot easier to have that narrative about and budget.
But every parent doesn't want their child in a designated gifted
No,
school.
I don't.
And that's my point. So what I'm saying right now is about providing services
No matter what.
across the district for the students that deserve the services, not just in one isolated place where we bring everybody in. Just
Exactly.
It's not really an either or, it's a both and in some situations, and it's how we actually,
right.
look at our resources so that we're able to do that.
Perfect. Let's,
Keep doing the charts.
Jeremy, were you done with everything that you needed to present?
I mean, that covers the major questions. I mean, I think bringing it back to, how big of a problem are the attendance boundaries, which is where we started the conversation for those items. This data frames some of that conversation. I do have a little bit more if you want to see it, or we can save it for
You've got about 2 or 3 more minutes, so come on. Let's
Well,
go.
I'll hit the last two pretty quick things. They are fairly quick. Again, looking at it from that perspective of how big of a problem it is, like I said, we have a moderate number of schools with a capacity issue. We have a moderate number of schools that are having out of boundary enrollment that is significantly high. But when we start looking at the geographic location of our boundaries, which is what we've looked at mostly at the first meeting, you can start seeing some consistencies or inconsistencies, however you would like to see it. And this is just some extra data points for informational purposes around those. If we look at all of our attendance boundaries aligned, the average is that our attendance boundary for a school covers at average 3 neighborhood boundaries, as defined by the city. That does remove cans from the average because it is an extreme outlier, as it does cover 11 different neighborhoods and technically a couple extra if you count them for the various grade bands. But the majority of the neighborhood or the attendance boundaries are somewhere between 2. We only have one I could find that only hits one neighborhood, but it doesn't encompass the whole thing, which is Winton Hills. But most of them encompass at least 2, and between 2 and 6.
The statistic piece is crucial for me, but also just philosophically, in our movement of belonging and inclusion and diversity and what have you. I think there is a need. I think Carol talked about what the city would like to be seeing, the population growth. I think there's a need, as I believe it was Yvette Simpson that pointed this out in that youth report several years ago too, that our teenagers don't have a sense of belonging to a neighborhood the way that perhaps people that are older do. Or part of it is the walkability. Part of it's having a sense of more parental involvement, more community involvement if it's identified within a neighborhood and there's a kind of geography piece, as well as the transportation issues or whatever. But I don't want to lose sight of there's some philosophical, social, emotional reasons to try to be thinking about this, as well as statistical reasons to be seeing it I think is crucial. And I think it might play even bigger as we go kind of into the high school era, but we don't have to do that yet. So I want us to keep track of what you're proving kind of to us, showing about the neighborhoods. And I do think that when and this precedes me even, that I think these boundary lines were quite arbitrary. And they may have, the specific reasoning probably in part was integration and quotas and whatever, which now you can't do. So I think it would be very good for us to have reason to do things that we're doing and be able to have the community help us figure out what those reasons are.
And I think, thank you for sharing that. It's very, very on point. Your last slide, I want you to go to that too, because it speaks specifically to what you're talking about.
Yeah, so, and that's the final piece here, and this is, I want to be very, I want to stress strongly that this is a single data point that we begin looking at. It's more informative than it is evaluative, because this takes a much deeper analysis. But in the blue section of the spreadsheet, you don't have to look at it now, but we did look at the averages for each of the subgroups for the racial diversity of each of the schools, and flagged probably a poor choice of words, marked those that have they are above the average for the district when we looked at the rest of the schools, or below the average in any particular group. So it's just a single point of data. Like I said, again, it's not very evaluative because it's only looking against the average within our own schools. To really look at that in a deeper perspective, we would have to do some very extensive demographic studies, community growth studies, and things that would become much more resource intensive to look at what that really means in terms of aligning or seeing the ethnicity and diversity versus the neighborhood and the boundaries within what they're overlapping would be. This particular chart I thought was of interest. In the lower left-hand corner, you see the charter and non-public schools. This is a representation of their entire enrollment as far as what we are aware of that they provide to us, represented by the ethnicity. And the upper right is CPS. So you can just see kind of the color blotting differences between the two and what's similar in terms of where the different geographic areas are for each of the ethnicities represented in our schools and theirs.
Say that again.
So the red is, what is the red and what is the blue?
So the blue would be white, the red would be African American or black, the purple is Hispanic. Green, I probably should pull up the legend. So I don't want to mess that up. Sorry.
It's okay. I just want people to know what they're looking at.
I want to
Reason.
Probably wait 10 extra.
But we won't be that much more. Okay. I just want Jeremy to finish.
I'm keeping this packet.
So while Jeremy's pulling this up to explain this last slide, let's collectively talk about a timeline. What should be our next move?
Well, we shouldn't have any less than monthly meetings. And as after the school year really gets started, maybe they're slightly more intense than that. So I think at least monthly meetings. The treasurer and superintendent have said that the budget process, the early budget process, are going to be earlier than normal, which means October, not waiting till January to get some input. So you have that pressing. And periodic, I don't know how people feel about periodic recommendations that the superintendent and administration would be and treasurer would be making as we go through this. So it's not all everything on one page. So I think I'd look at it a more fluid, budget impactful, but also continuing this community engagement and widening it significantly.
So recognizing that school is starting because we picked this date because school is not in session.
And somebody's going to have to be teaching.
I know that we've got some teachers here too. So, and the impact of staff, I heard you loud and clear, Superintendent, right? What would be a cadence that would make sense, date and time? Let's just plan the next couple of months. Let's take it to the end of the year. We know we're not going to do anything in December. I know you want to meet more than that, but Christmas time is precious. So we're not going to meet in December. So we're looking at September and October, November, maybe November.
Okay, so my recommendation would be at least the middle of September to give us the opportunity to get schools fully started to move after Labor Day. So if we look at the week of the 12th or the 19th, I think would be the next one for us. My additional recommendation to that would be afternoon versus in the morning to give us the opportunity to also engage with schools in the morning. Those would be my two initial recommendations. And the third recommendation would be, and it may change as we go through our committee conversations, but to also try to schedule it at a time that we don't have another committee meeting or board meeting on the same day, just because it makes this for a very long period of time.
Well, I actually like the day because then I can just be there the whole day. But I do understand, and I think that we shouldn't change. I've said this before to everybody. We've committed to committee meetings for the year, so I think that those should be set and remain consistent for the year. What's another? If you don't do a day, there's another. What time works? Let's look at a time. Afternoon was suggested. Does that work for people?
Yeah.
Like 4 o'clock when the teachers.
Okay, 4.
Late afternoon, early evening. Yeah.
4. Okay, so
check with the
I'm good with the 4 o'clock time.
Okay, so if we're looking at the week of the 12th, that would be the 13th, 14th, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, because we've got we've got a board meeting on the 12th, so that's out, and we've got 14th. A policy and meeting on the 16th.
I would prefer. I'm suggesting the 14th.
Cool.
What day of the week is that?
Wednesday.
The 12th.
No, 14th.
14th.
So,
And that works for me too.
What about October? It would be the
I
same.
think, can we look at, do you all want the third Wednesday of the month? That would be the
Got a question
14th.
If we,
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Will we stay in the 90 minutes?
Yes.
Okay.
The 14th is the second Wednesday.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry,
September.
my apologies. Do we want to look at the
Yes,
second
it's the
Wednesday for
second.
October? Now, we have a cow that day.
we have a cow on the 7th, don't we?
I
It's
have it
on-
on the 12th.
It's on the 12th
In October or September?
in October.
October.
It's the 12th.
What about
Oh,
the
yeah.
5th or the
Gotcha.
19th?
The 19th would probably be better because it's a little,
19th.
the 19th is empty. Can we do the October 19th?
Okay, so I have a commitment that I have a 3 to 5 commitment on the 19th that I don't, I can't move around. It's still moving.
Okay, so
Can we move it over to 20th?
we
just for
have
that
the levy, we got a meeting on that day. We can't do that.
The 4-letter word.
Yeah. So let's look at, what about the 13th? And the reason I said not the 21st is because we've got a policy meeting that day. So if we don't have things on the same day,
We have a meeting that day until 5
14th,
on the
13th.
On 13th.
13th.
the 13th,
Mhm.
all right. We've got an audit committee meeting that day. We're gonna have to have some multiple stuff, guys, going
Too many
on.
committee meetings.
We got a lot of stuff, but that's, I mean, the audit, we have to have that, so. Yes, see, the
What about the
devil's advocate
18th?
again.
What about the 18th?
I'm out of town that day,
Okay.
but,
What about the 25th?
okay,
It works.
25th, that will be a Tuesday. Is that good for everybody? We're
About that day. It's too open on my calendar.
October 25th, and we're still staying at 4 p.m.
Yeah.
Now let's look at November.
God, I don't even have my calendar filled out that
Well,
far here.
Well, that's good.
This should be
because
pretty
you'll be
open
up
then. It
first.
should be pretty
Yeah.
open. So we're out the week of the 21st, right?
Thanksgiving, yes.
Okay.
That's not a good week.
Yeah, definitely not. So
What about
the
9th?
What about we push it to the beginning of December? That would then serve for November and December meeting.
not my preference, but I'm happy to. Since we're
That
meeting
means
late
you're going
in
to get a
October.
lot of assignments at the previous meeting.
Okay, so December. What about? Are we talking about the week of the 5th? It can't be
Yeah,
the
first
5th because.
First week
that-
in there would be great.
So what about the 7th?
Yep.
I don't hear anybody
good with
talking.
That's fine for me.
So Wednesday, December the 7th at 4 p.m.
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay, Ms. Phyllis, did you get those? Okay, so we will come back and post our agenda. If you all do have any questions or things that you want to see, please send us an email.
So we really can't take these home. Okay.
I'm taking mine.
We're going to allow
I
you
have
all
notes
to take
already.
those. Okay, but it is online, so it's online too. Make sure that you check these out.
You have to bring them back. You know, that's it.
December.
This is not like a
I got the
replacement
7th.
bus car.
September 14th,
10:25 at 4.
October
And
25th.
This is it.
December
We'll start charging.
Does anyone have any
What was the
other
September
questions?
date?
Robert, any questions online? Okay, so,
September 14th.
yes, ma'am.
It would be great. I know the administration was kind of taking notes as to what might be some additional questions, but I really would like to have the administration kind of be able to review these things that are called magnets and aren't, for all intents and purposes, and so that we're really starting to deal with that. And my other interest is the 14 elementary schools that are neighborhood schools that don't carry the name. It'd be great to actually know which neighborhood they're in. I mean, it's Kilgore, it's Chase, it's all those places that I just would like to see the coverage based upon those schools. But there's 52 neighborhoods in the city of Cincinnati alone, let alone Silverton and Cheviot and whatever, and or Amberley and what have you. But yeah, I don't know. You don't worry.
Okay, so
if that's a possibility,
we've got 2 action items.
Can I just add one? This is more from my colleagues sitting here. This was very helpful to me. Like I said, there's some information when I made the request that wasn't included. If there's anything in your files that you have that you think like this that might be helpful, could you make sure that we all get the same information?
Yeah, and I'll,
Yes, ma'am.
absolutely.
And I would imagine that Eve probably has all
Hard
of
copies.
it. Okay.
Yes, and then are we providing that to the public?
I wouldn't do it yet since
No,
we're not
not
calling
yet.
it a plan, but I think it's good to keep referring to some of the history and some of the things that some of it's done and some of it isn't.
Yes, I just don't want us to reference things that they can't see. They don't know what
Exactly.
we're talking about.
Well, go ahead.
Some of the big broad stuff they can, I think it's.
No, I was just going to say it's more just for us to get caught up. I just want to be caught up
top.
on the
Okay,
information. If we bring it to the discussion, then I can see us.
Then we share it.
making
Yeah.
it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to officially call this meeting to order. We will see you all September the 14th at 4 p.m. Please log into Blue Jeans, review the mapping data, send us any questions that you have. Is there anything else from my colleagues? Board Member Bolton?
I love this committee because I love the interplay with the community and staff. Just great.
Board Member Jones, Vice President Jones?
I just want to repeat because I'm feeling a little I don't know what the word, uncomfortable, because I don't want, and I've said this to Dr. Moffitt, that I'm not here to undermine anything.
All right.
I do feel like, though, that, that my comments weren't taken quite the way I had intended it to. And I do understand this as a priority. I just want to make sure that in the whole scheme of things, timing is right, finances are right, and all of that. So I don't want anybody to take that as me being against what we're doing. Okay.
Absolutely not. I took it as in jest, just because I'm in between. I'm sandwiched in between so much history, and they are really more like parents. Believe it or not, when the camera goes off, I'm anticipating getting chastised about this. So
yes, ma'am.
So we are going to officially call this meeting concluded. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Thank you to staff that are here, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you.